One of the defining traits of Western role-playing games, descended as they are from the grand tradition of tabletop RPGs, is character building, using both story elements and gameplay systems to express a character to take on a given adventure. And while some recent RPGs attempt to force a role onto the player, like, say, Deus Ex's Adam Jensen or The Witcher's Geralt, the tradition of character creation mostly continues, from big-budget games like Dragon Age to more modestly budgeted and even crowdfunded productions. Pillars of Eternity came out earlier this year, and before that was Wasteland 2 in 2014, which even comes with a little freeform biography section for the characters to establish whatever backstory you want. The original Wasteland was, of course, the precursor to Fallout, which also inherited the same open-ended approach to role-playing inspired by tabletop systems. When Bethesda purchased the Fallout franchise in 2007, however, the subsequent games were no longer niche isometric turn-based role-playing games. Fallout had become a sprawling open world shown in first person where every character is voiced and physical combat gets leaned on far more than other forms of problem-solving. And this has created a tension in playstyles that I think has come to a head in Fallout 4. It feels caught between its legacy as a tabletop-influenced role-playing game that lets you create your own characters, and its current position as a huge, expensive, open-world action RPG. To start, let's look at how Fallout used to work. The original Fallout was actually intended to utilize GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, a pen-and-paper role-playing setup designed to be applicable to pretty much any scenario. When that deal fell through, though, Black Isle invented their own system, the Special System, which took a number of ideas from GURPS while still being legally distinct. Combining core character stats, skills, and optional traits, the idea was to give players a really broad palette from which to create characters. Want to make a Mr. Magoo type? Simply pump perception way down and luck way up, and you have a character with a much smaller vision radius but superhumanly good fortune. You could explore the wastes as a sleazy car salesperson by bringing charisma and perception way up, but having endurance, strength, and agility be kinda low. Or maybe you're a super gymnast with high endurance and agility, but slightly lower than average perception, luck, and intelligence. And maybe throw in the small frame or finesse optional traits. These stats and perks and traits ultimately determine your playstyle, yes, but they also say something about who your character is, what they're good at, and why they're good at it. If a character has exceptional strength or intelligence, or if a character is particularly unlucky or ungraceful, that informs your understanding of that character. While you can improve your special stats later in the game, opportunities to do so tend to be rare and or expensive, so these core stats feel rather rigid and static and end up defining who your character is both in playstyle and in a story sense. The super science genius Vault Dweller is going to have a very different story than the hulking strongman Vault Dweller. It's also important to point out that all characters start at average in all stats and have a few points to disperse, but not a lot. If you want to be good at more than one thing, you have to start sacrificing other things. The same line of thinking also goes into the optional traits, which tend to have a major advantage and a major disadvantage attached to them. Take chem resistance, for example. If you have it, addiction is far less likely, but the benefits of the drugs themselves are shorter-lived. Or look at the Jinxed perk, where you're more likely to have a critical miss, but so is every other character near you. You don't really get anything for free in this system. Every point comes with either its own negative or the opportunity cost to do something else. You can't be super strong and super charismatic and super agile and super smart. It's not a system designed for building superheroes. The whole special system in Fallout 1 and 2 is designed to create someone with strength and with flaws, with skills that can help them get through the adventure to come, but also the ability to run into situations where they need to run away or to rely on friends, or even simply fail and move on. Now let's compare that to how special works in Fallout 4. The most immediate change is that the special stats no longer default to 5 as a baseline, with the ability to add points to some categories by taking points away from others. Instead, we have a system where every character has a baseline of average at 1 and can only move up as they gain experience. And think about what this does to the role-playing aspect of Fallout 4. First, it removes the opportunity for real weaknesses. You can no longer play a character who is a 95-pound weakling, or is crazy unlucky, or embarrassingly uncharismatic, or clumsy to the extreme. So instead of having things you fail at, or things that are weaknesses, we now have a roundly average character who simply has things they can't do because they're not amazing at them. Or rather, things they can't do because they're not amazing at them yet. The other impact to role-playing is that because each stat is upgradable after every level is gained, the sense that these special stats were somehow permanent or reflective of an underlying character has all but disappeared. With no level cap in place, playing Fallout 4 is basically a grind to go from average at most things and okay at some things, to a godlike superhuman in all skills and all abilities. To further remove your ability to sculpt a character or playstyle from this system, there are level caps for each perk. So, for example, you can't just continue to dump points into sneaking once you have 3 agility. You need to reach certain level thresholds, often more than 10 levels apart, in order to increase your stealthiness. That means for those 10 levels, you're forced to put points into other skills and perks. So you can't really specialize or play a stealth character so much as you can prioritize unlocking stealth first because that's how you would like to play, and ultimately come back around to it 10 levels later when you finally can get the next iteration of the stealth perk. What I'm getting at is that the character definition systems in Fallout 4 really don't facilitate playing a role, at least not in a traditional role-playing game sense. Yeah, you get to pick your character's name, gender, and face, and yeah, there are some limitations on you early in the game before you're a superhuman that restrict your playstyle a little bit. But the sense of creating a person with a set list of skills and abilities that reflect a backstory or general personality type is simply no longer there. This gets reinforced by the game's other systems, most notably how dialogue has changed. Previous Fallout games have tried to provide a variety of dialogue options to facilitate role-playing in different ways. Low-intelligence characters would have special dialogue options, and high science, speechcraft, barter, or other skills could also open up additional dialogue trees. Again, it's systems existing to facilitate role-playing in an environment where, because of the nature of computer RPGs in comparison to tabletop games, not every potentiality could actually be considered. Even Fallout 3, Bethesda's first Fallout title, managed to hold on to this. In the intro sequence, the player character gets thrown a birthday party attended by Butch, the resident bully. After the player gets a sweet roll as a present from an elderly vault dweller, Butch demands his share.
I'm hungry, and that stupid robot destroyed the cake. Give me that sweet roll you got from Old Lady Palmer.
The game offers several options as a response, from the submissive to the passive-aggressive to the aggressive-aggressive. You could be snarky, or you could be a tattletale, or you could give in to his demands, or you could try to broker peace by offering him half. Each would say something about who you're trying to play as. In Fallout 4, however, that's all been replaced by a simple 4-option system that seems to present 4 options because that's how many face buttons are on a typical controller? And that's really the only explanation anyone can come up with. It doesn't make any sense. 4 is too many for a yes-no please repeat setup, and too few for an expressive breadth of options. It almost always feels like they've just either padded out a yes-no, or really limited an actual role-playing setup.
Tell me everything you can, no matter how painful it might be.
There was a man and a woman. They didn't say much.
But worse than the arbitrarily consistent number of options is the fact that you get a terse word or two to describe your selections, often not really enough to know what some of the answers will entail. Like, look at this exchange.
Kellogg. He worked for you?
Kellogg. He was an Institute asset long before I arrived here. It wasn't until I became director that I learned of all the things he'd done. What kind of man he was.
You used him could be an accusatory tone, like, you used him? Or it could be, you used him? Expressing shock that the Institute would work with such a scoundrel. It could be the disappointment of a parent hearing that their son got his hands dirty. You used him? You were involved? But without any additional context, those 3 words could go any of those ways, and possibly even more. This problem plagues any dialogue option that doesn't warrant a yes or a no, and sometimes even those end with a confusing, sarcastic choice. Like, when Piper offers to help if you do her interview, there's the option to agree to do the interview, to not do the interview, to ask what the interview entails, and to sarcastic. Is it a yes to the interview sarcastically? A no? A sarcastic dismissal of the whole concept? Is it a charismatic attempt to charm her past the entire interview into just joining you? Who knows? It's just sarcastic.
Listen, after breakfast, I was thinking we could head to the park.
Oh, right. The park. With you. Because I want to get pregnant again.
Sir? Mum? You should come and see this!
What's odd is that this isn't the only game to suffer from this. Mass Effect has had this problem for years, and for some reason Bethesda thought it would be a good idea to emulate that here. Deus Ex Human Revolution also does it, but at least it explains what each option is. But neither of those games are renowned for their dialogue options, and Fallout 4 is arguably worse than either. The point is, the role of dialogue has been greatly diminished. Not completely excised, mind you. You can still end a few quests without combat by passing a charisma check, for example. But it no longer feels like another avenue to expression. You're no longer looking at a series of 5 or even 10 options and wondering what your character would say. You're looking at 4, always 4, short phrases, trying to infer what they really actually mean, and realizing that they almost all amount to false choices or some variation of a choice between yes, I'll do it, and not now. And all of this sounds really negative, but I'm trying hard not to come off that way. It would be easy to stamp my feet and dismiss all of this as quote-unquote dumbing down. And, well, okay, maybe the dialogue system is a little insulting to their audience with its let's not make them read too much or we'll scare them away approach, but a lot of these decisions make sense when you look at the game for what Bethesda seems to be actually trying to make. As a game developer, Bethesda really has its own aesthetic, or at least a series of interesting fixations. Their games tend to be a bit genre-defying, exploration-based action RPGs that are as much wandering simulators as they are Diablos. It's this wholly unique thing that doesn't really get made by anyone else. A game with all of the loot gathering and stat mongering of an ARPG, but much of the gameplay is spent quietly roaming the countryside for points of interest and discovering the stories and items that await you there. And they've always been games that don't really value character expression so much as they value player expression. And that, I think, is one of the key differences between Fallout 1 and 2, and to some extent New Vegas, and Fallout 4, and to some extent Fallout 3. When you stop trying to roleplay and just start doing things that are cool to you, the player, Fallout 4 becomes a fundamentally different game. And I'm sure there's a lot of people going, well, duh, right now, but realize if you've been following the franchise since day one, it's both a profound shift and also a subtle one that's kind of hard to pick up on. You still have a character creation screen, you still have a skill system, and you still have dialogue options and relationships with characters. But none of those are about the guy or gal you've made. They're about you, the player. You get to decide what characters you want to bring along with you on this adventure. You get to build your own custom guns and custom power armor. Heck, you get to paint the armor with cool patterns and change the color of the headlight. You get to build your own custom villages and play mayor. And as you play, you can focus your perks to unlock your preferred playstyle. These choices are never, ever framed as, what would your character do? They're framed as, what would you want to do right now? How do you want to express yourself in this game space? The player character, in a very real sense, doesn't really exist much in Fallout 4. The character is mostly you. And it makes sense, right? If their aesthetic is something of a blend of walking simulators and ARPGs, then it stands to reason that they treat their characters in a similar manner. That is, they stand in for the player with the recognition that the actual avatar means next to nothing. And that is like a huge shift for a game that used to want to use tabletop role-playing conventions and was subtitled a post-nuclear role-playing game. The player character is dead, long live the player. And when the game is viewed through this lens, a power fantasy game built for the player about exploring wastes, learning its histories, and collecting its loot while expressing themselves in various ways, it succeeds tremendously. It's hard to say I didn't enjoy some of the more absurd moments or wacky combat. I mean, there's sniping with rocket launchers. Or awkward conversations.
It looks like you've done well for yourselves.
It's a good start, yeah. Proud of all the work we've done. What if this place could be more than just a what if it could also be we want this to be a place that maybe we could make people take a second look. Maybe then they'd see that we're not monsters.
I think it's a great idea.
You really think so?
And then there was my favorite, giving ultimatums to the guy in power armor with a minigun.
Go ahead and give me everything you own, and I'll initiate you as a first-level pillar of the community.
You must think I'm an idiot.
Well, you came in here, didn't you? Now, you've got two choices. Give me everything you've got, or we take it anyway.
I'm walking out of here. Your choice what you want to do about it.
That's not how this works.
He's a threat to the... You crazy?
And the vignettes left on computer logs or in notes, or even just in the artful placement of a corpse and some items, can be surprisingly effective. And how cool is it to have customized hot rod power armor chilling in a base I built myself? Yes, it's a far more shallow, popcorny experience than the more cerebral act of taking on another person's role through statistics and dice rolls, but it also kind of had to be this big. Fallout wouldn't be the smash hit it's become, and couldn't justify the huge investment it cost to build, if it were a niche adaptation of pen and paper staples. But even though the game's much more enjoyable when you don't try to force the concept of role-playing onto it, there's still a tension there. There's a lot of legacy bits from Fallout that simply make no sense anymore. A lot of the perks are crammed into weird special slots, for example. Why does perception make you better at demolitions? Why does charisma make you immune to being an alcoholic? Why does your intelligence give your Pip-Boy a new feature? I feel like going to a straight-up skill tree, which the new system basically emulates anyway, would be more honest and straightforward. But the biggest issue is the few times they do ask you to roleplay. The shift back to, wait, no, the player character does matter here, is sometimes abrupt, and the rules change arbitrarily. You're supposed to go after your son, which by any measure should be the character's #1 priority, but the game encourages you as the player to screw around for days and days until you do another story mission, at which point your character comes back and is a driven, desperate parent.
Will you help us?
No time to waste.
Look, dumbass, that's not how baseball was played.
That right, Mr. Smarty Pants? Give me Sean, the real Sean, right now!
And while player agency is usually tossed aside in the interests of the core story, like how you can't talk your way out of fighting Kellogg, which, as a charisma-based character, was infuriating, there are times it's suddenly reintroduced without warning. For example, you can't kill the first courser you go on a mission with and free the synth you've been sent to retrieve because you haven't had a few father-son moments the game wants to be sure that you've had. But once you've had those conversations, the player can suddenly decide that capturing synths isn't for them and they can turn against the Institute. The only way to find out whether it's an option is to attack the courser and see if they're immortal for story reasons. If they die, great, you get to express yourself in the game space. If not, well, hey, we have a story to tell and we don't want you messing it up. There are all these little moments where the game wakes up and remembers it's supposed to be an RPG, and they feel forced and the options they offer feel flaccid or arbitrary. So I find myself really torn on how to feel about Fallout 4. On one hand, it's a continuation of a franchise that used to pride itself on a very player-character-centric view of the world, one that emphasized creating a character and playing a role. And the fact that it kind of looks, at least on the surface, like it's still engaged in that approach, and even occasionally asks me to make actual role-playing decisions, makes the game feel frustrating at times. But I'm also really a fan of engaging with games on their own terms, to judge whether they're a success or failure based on what they aim to do rather than what I wish they did, and in that sense I think the game's terrific. It's a great exploration-based action RPG in the vein of other Bethesda games. So do I celebrate the fact that Fallout is now this really entertaining, if shallow, combination of player expression and exploration? I mean, I like both of those things, and everybody I know has their own Fallout 4 stories already. It's a great little game. Or do I lament the loss of deeper role-playing options in exchange for an emphasis on combat that is, frankly, not that great? Is it okay to lament that loss even if it's not what the game's trying to do anymore? My current answer is to feel both at the same time, Schrodinger's cat style. Every time I'm forced to kill a character I feel I should be able to talk down from combat, I hate the game a little more. But I also can't stop playing it. There's always another story, item, or adventure just over the horizon. And hey, when I really want to tell my story about the sleazy medic with a shady past in the post-nuclear apocalypse, there's always Wasteland 2.